In case there is anybody logged on who has not met me, I'm Megan and I coordinate the Sustainability Fellows program here at UNH. And very excited to have collaborated with Leah Bamberger, who is also here and runs the Social Innovation Internship program. So this webinar series is a collaboration between both of those programs, and we're happy to welcome you to our 7th and final alumni panel of the summer. As most of you know, we had originally planned a 6-part webinar series, and right as the students were getting started this summer, George Floyd was murdered, which set off protests throughout the world and has inspired a real reckoning around white privilege in our culture. And all of the students really stepped up. They wanted to do more and wanted all of us to do more. And so because they called for it, social justice and racial equity have become a really important part of the fellowship experience this summer and have been more deeply integrated into the program overall. So we're really grateful to them for stepping up and calling for that. As a result of our conversations with the students, one of the things they asked for was that we organize an additional webinar for the summer. And so we are really grateful to our moderator and panelists for your willingness to join us here on short order for a bonus webinar this summer, right here at the end of the summer. So we're looking forward to hearing about your experiences working on these critical issues in your communities and your organizations. As always, we've aligned the webinar with some of the Sustainable Development Goals. So today's Sustainable Development Goals are number 10, which is reduced inequalities, and SDG number 16, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions. Obviously, those two are, really highly connected. And we're going to start, as we always do, with a quick video about one of the SDGs. So, Faina, would you go ahead and play the video?
Awesome. Well, hi, everyone, and thanks again for joining us. I'm Leah Bamberger, and I'm the director of the Changemaker Collaborative, formerly the Center for Social Innovation and Enterprise, and I oversee the Summer Social Innovation Internship Program. I'm excited today to introduce our moderator, Maisha Renee Forbes, Senior Vice President of Culture, Inclusion, and Strategic Advising and Managing Director of Diversified Search at Koya Leadership Partners, a leading executive search and strategic advising firm dedicated to connecting exceptionally talented people with mission-driven clients. Koya is a member of the Diversified Search Group, which Forbes, not this Forbes, but Forbes magazine, named in 2020 as one of the top 5 executive search firms in the nation. Koya partners with nonprofits and NGOs, institutions of higher ed, responsible businesses, and social enterprises in local communities and around the world. I want to first make a nod to the interconnectedness of changemakers and advocates for sustainability. So Koya's founder and CEO, Katie Bouton, is herself a UNH alumna in English, journalism, and women's studies, and a huge supporter of the UNH Changemaker Collaborative, and helped connect us to Maisha years ago, and I'm so glad she did. Maisha was a Phillips Exeter Academy graduate from right here in New Hampshire, and then went on to complete her BA in Sociology and African American Studies at Brown University. And prior to joining Koya, Maisha was the Director of Recruiting and Professional Development at Citizen Schools, an organization that works to reimagine the middle school experience for low-income students ensuring that each child has the academic support, hands-on learning experiences, and mentorship required to combat the opportunity gap and positions them for success in high school, college, and as a productive and inspired member of society. For a second nod at the Changemakers Network, and another reminder on why you all should connect with one another and stay in touch, Citizen Schools was co-founded by Eric Schwartz, who in 2016 also co-founded the College for Social Innovation, which facilitates a semester in the city program, where one of our fantastic panelists and a number of our former interns now work. Okay, so after Citizen Schools, Maisha went on to work in recruiting and sourcing for the Corporate Executive Board, which is now Gartner, an S&P 500 company. She then went on to work for the KIPP Foundation, a nonprofit network, college preparatory public charter schools dedicated to preparing students in educationally underserved communities for success in college and life. I was there for 4 years during a period of intense growth. She led the talent acquisition team responsible for more than doubling the staff during her tenure and played a lead role in the organization's diversity and inclusion initiative. So today, currently, Maisha is the primary lead for Koya's human capital consulting practice. And I hope I have not underemphasized her deep commitment and experience in education, youth development, and diversity and inclusion, employee engagement, and organizational culture, as she has such a unique combination of experience from both the nonprofit and the private sectors. The basis of her work is to help organizations solve their most complex people challenges to achieve their strategic goals. Maisha helps clients take a holistic approach to human capital and invest in multiple points along their employee life cycle to improve their overall employee experience and increase retention rates over time. She specializes in helping clients to consider, improve, and align all these phases of the employee experience. Maisha was a host supervisor for one of our interns who was matched with Koya a few years ago. Before Zoom was the new Google, we were learning from Koya about best practices for creating an engaged culture within an organization that did so much of their work with teams in various locations remotely. Maisha consults and writes about investing in leadership development from within and how to stronger pipeline for increasing diversity and inclusion rather than recruitment alone. I often describe it this way. Picture us pre-COVID, trying to have a birthday party for our kids. You want to invite the whole family, all the generations. You can't just send the invite and not put any work behind it. You need to make sure the grandparents have a way to get there and back, perhaps even a way to get into the house, make sure there's kid-friendly food available, party games for the kids, places for the adults to sit and talk, all that stuff. So that's what Maisha does. She does that for the organization. So for our final webinar of the summer, we couldn't be more grateful to have you join us, Maisha. So tell us, what's going on in your field? What's the buzz? And is diversity and inclusion among the most highly sought after advising, consultancy, or search services you've been seeing?
Thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you, Megan. I'd have to say that is the kindest and most generous bio reading I've ever had. So I am very grateful. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. I'll jump right in because really it's not about me. I want to give time to our really wonderful panel here. But to say right now, and what I'm seeing across the nonprofit sector, because Hoya only works with mission-driven and nonprofits, but across so many sectors in the nonprofit, but across every single one of those sectors, we're seeing a huge emphasis on all things diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it's really changed the landscape of my job. Even I spend more time, really doing the consulting as opposed to just placing leaders in organizations. I was spending more time, mostly pre-COVID, placing heads of diversity, equity, inclusion. So chief diversity officers, chief equity officers, chief people replacing CEOs. Particularly, I often work with organizations who need to replace a founder or who need to do a search that has kind of cultural implications or that really is new or nuanced for the culture and the people. That's always my lens, is thinking about the people experience. And so now I'm spending time with organizations thinking about how do they live into their value of DEI if it is one of their values, or how to create values that represent what they want to show, that aligns with the causes they serve. So if they're an education organization and they're serving communities along in the education space, and the communities they serve are Black and Brown communities, or squarely in the BIPOC world, they want to think about how their values can mirror that. So I'm spending a lot of time now helping organizations either create values, revisit values, or think about how to bring their values to life. Of course, that's coming out of the recent, what I call some people call a second pandemic, or what was, always lying underneath the surface. And now it's gotten more visibility or more energy, more, attention on it. I'd be remiss if I didn't say there are lots of people who always saw, the need and the critical nature for the work, who felt the racism every day, who were living that, and who always felt like it was a matter of life and death. But I got to say now, with everyone really focused on it and focused on their role in it, organizations thinking about how do they, move from what may have been doing nothing to now move to doing the performative, to thinking about, no, let's not just be performative, let's be transformative, let's be really transformational, really helping organizations to move along that spectrum. And it's been an amazing body of work already in the last couple of months. So it's exciting. It's interesting. I think one of the questions you asked, was, what opportunity to see for young professionals in this space. And I gotta say, what's amazing is that the young professionals are leading, so many of the grassroots movements. So much of the movement that's happening in the world right now is led by younger professionals. And so there's such an interesting attention on, what they're creating the space that they're uniquely made to create and to serve in. And so organizations are taking note of that. And so they're creating roles for more younger professionals to come into. They're creating opportunities to think about how can you translate your experience, whether it's mostly schooling because you haven't had a lot of work experience. How do you translate that into the workplace? Where's the need? And so a lot of organizations are being much more open-minded and creative in thinking about ways to engage younger professionals, which I find it amazing to see, because there's a huge bias often against that younger professional. You don't have enough experience. Well, how do you gain that experience? And and you can have wonderful internships and like all of you are doing, but you need to have organizations that are willing to take a chance on some younger professionals starting their career and allowing them to create a space that is so unique to them and so unique to their voice right now in their role in this movement. And I think that's a really powerful thing that's happening, and it's been pretty amazing to watch it with a lot of my clients. I'm so proud of the clients that we have. Many of you may have seen some of the work that's happening with people, making huge donations, or people, giving a lot of money to organizations and causes that are new. There are new funding sources coming out. And it's been wonderful to hear some of my clients say, we got this money and it can change the way we operate. It can change the way we do things. And they're taking those funds and they're thinking about how do we make sure whatever we're doing, it's through the lens of equity. It's through the lens of racial justice. It's through the lens of social justice, all the while continuing to serve our mission and our cause. And so that's been, I think that's like the hopefulness, and what I see as the inspiration right now across the landscape of the kinds of organizations that I get to work with. And I'm pretty proud of that. So exciting to know that there are people who want to do this work and continue in this work, and wishing everyone the best of luck. But now we get to hear from some alums who are contributing to these spaces in their own ways, from their own seats and their own positions. And I'm super excited to let you hear from them. So I'm going to jump into some introductions of our alums. Is that okay, Hannah and Megan? Awesome. All right. So first, we have Leah Bamberger. She is the Director of Sustainability for the City of Providence, one of my favorite cities. Leah, I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you and your work, and kind of, what you're seeing right now across your field.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was psyched to hear you went to Brown. So you know a little bit about this town
I do.
And our history.
And I love Providence.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I moved here to Providence 5 years ago. Before that, I worked for the city of Boston. Before that, I did a little bit of consulting on sustainability, working mostly with local governments. Before that, I was in grad school at UMass Amherst studying regional planning, and that's where and when I was a fellow before the program was even housed in UNH. So it makes, I guess I'm ancient, part of the history. But I guess I want to try to be concise, because I know we don't have a lot of time, and I want to definitely make space for a lot of dialogue. I will say, first, kudos to all of the fellows who really pushed for this conversation, and I encourage you to keep pushing within your institutions, wherever you hold some power, and really just learning to harness and understand your own power and your situational, wherever that brings you. It's something that is critical to this work. This work is challenging. It's often confusing to really understand your role, depending on your background, depending on your race, depending on your privilege. But it is definitely a fight that needs to be, that there is space for absolutely everyone, and that is how we will make progress. And there's lots of nuance to it, and I know I have screwed up so many times in this work. I've learned so much. I think when I came to the city of Providence, I had little to no experience working on racial equity. It was something that I didn't know, that I didn't understand at all. I had learned some things in school and from my, family and just upbringing about racism and the civil rights movement and the country's history. But it wasn't until I did it was an Undoing Racism training with the People's Institute of Survival and Beyond, that I really began to understand racism in the modern context, racism in my community, in me, in the institutions that I'm a part of. And so that was really transformative, and it, for me personally, and it led to, and that was about 5 years ago. It was shortly after I started in this work here in Providence, and we due to the partnerships with community and the leadership that they've offered and the guidance and support that they've offered, we've done some really great work in Providence, and it's been held up as models to follow in terms of how we've really flipped the engagement process on our head, how we've centered frontline communities in the decision making, and have taken a lot of time and resources to put behind this shift of power that needs to happen, and the capacity building both within government and within our community that needs to happen so we can be better about sharing power. And through that process, I've certainly have felt very inadequate at times, feeling like, I'm not from Providence, I'm a white woman, like I should not be leading this work. I have so much learning to still do about this. And feeling oftentimes like I should probably just quit, like this isn't the right work for me. But also sticking with it and getting comfortable with the work that makes me uncomfortable. And that's what a lot of people call your growing edge, right? That uncomfort zone, that the more you're in it, the more you begin to get comfortable with that work. So I will leave it at that. That's just a little bit about me and my background. It's been an amazing journey, and I'm so glad to have been able to do this work for the last 5 years.
Thank you so much, Leah. And thanks for making that so personal, and just for, being honest and direct. You know, they are lucky to have you based on how much we can hear you deeply care about the work. And you said something about making mistakes, you know, and I truly believe if we're not making big mistakes, if we're not getting wildly uncomfortable in this work, then we're not doing the work. We're not actually really pushing the work forward. So good for you. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Erin Puglia. She's a project manager at the Criterion Institute, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her and her work. Erin?
Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit about my background and where and what got me to my current role. And then, like Leah said, happy to engage in dialogue after that. But I guess to give a background of my education and where I've been in my roles, I went right into a master's in public policy program right after my undergraduate degree. I was really interested in social change efforts throughout college, and I really wanted to focus more on kind of systems change and really affecting change from a policy and structural level. So that's what kind of made me pursue my MPP. And as part of that program, I was a graduate fellow with an organization called New Hampshire Listens, which is actually housed in UNH's policy school. And as part of that work, I focused a lot on public engagement in communities, and a particular emphasis in that work was on racial equity and equity trainings, also working on community issues, in particular promoting equity and kind of analyzing bias and different community events that had arisen in New Hampshire. So that was a really valuable experience. And then as I was finishing up my master's, I completed my sustainability fellowship. I was working as an outreach and communications fellow for the NEMS network, the New England Municipal Sustainability Network. And as part of that work, I worked with and spoke with the NEMS representatives across New England to kind of analyze their progress towards sustainability goals with the international framework that's called the Global Covenant of Mayors Framework. And after I finished my fellowship, that's right when I finished my master's program as well. So while I was actually applying to new roles, I continued a little bit of work with the Sustainability Institute and a public engagement role that was similar to what I had done with New Hampshire Listens as well. And eventually came to the Criterion Institute where I work now. So Criterion is a global nonprofit think tank that uses finance for social change. So I kind of used a lot of my social change background to bridge the intersection of finance and change for social change actors. And so I started off as a program assistant, doing a wide range of kind of research, communications, administrative work, and eventually was promoted to my current role, which is a project manager of the Power of Policy program that we have, which seeks to work with governments and multilateral institutions to implement more equitable social finance programming. And as part of our work at Criterion, we do a lot on analyzing power and analyzing power dynamics in systems of finance, trying to include the social change sector in investment processes and in social finance processes, and just trying to make sure that we're really valuing knowledge from communities and making sure that it's compensated in different processes as well. So I guess even though I've had the opportunity to work on issues of equity in my work, I wanted to also echo what Leah had mentioned, that there's also an opportunity to always encourage the organizations that you work for to take on these issues and to analyze what's going on within the organization, even if maybe for the fellows and interns you don't go on to directly or explicitly work on these issues. There's always an opportunity to use your positions of power, positions of privilege within your organizations to encourage them to take on this important work. So that's kind of just an overview of what I've worked on and where I've been. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Erin. I love the emphasis on using your voice, you know, for the fellows to use your voice where you can. This was great. I'm going to go on to our next panelist, Ilana Drew. She's the Director of Partnership Strategy and Student Recruitment at the College for Social Innovation. Ilana, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm realizing every time that I just have too long of a job title, but I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you all, and I look forward to the questions and engaging part afterwards. Really briefly running through a lot of history. I got my undergrad in business management from UNH. And my focus in school in the beginning was more organizational development, but I learned about social innovation towards the end of that. And that was kind of something that shaped my future when you fast forward a little bit. I ended up right out of my undergrad taking a job actually in corporate financial planning for a semiconductor company, which while I learned so much about it, and things that are very useful for transferring to my future jobs, I really quickly realized that it was not fulfilling the part of me that needed to like work on issues that I cared about. The good thing about that is that knowing that I kind of felt like I was lacking, the ability to engage on those issues, I got involved in a lot of volunteer work, from mentoring low-income youth in my area to working on social sector or social safety net issues in terms of policy. And I was able to incorporate my volunteer life into the issues that I cared about, which were primarily social justice and racial equity. But eventually I started to feel like I wanted those things to merge a little bit more. So I returned to UNH to get a master's in public policy. Also, I think I was one cohort behind or before Erin. And while I was there, I continued some of my studies on the social safety net, but really began to kind of unpack how much the like racist and white supremacies, like principles that our country is built on, are what got us to the situation that we're in when we look at issues in terms of racial equity and economic justice and educational justice. So I kind of just sort of dug in further and further as I was going through my studies. And while I was there, I was able to do a graduate fellowship with the Social Innovation Internship program. And I was placed with a sustainable investment firm that was called Pax World, but I believe is Impacts Management now. Yeah, Faina's giving me a nod. And my work there was really kind of almost self-directed research on diversity in hiring, looking at gender diversity predominantly, but when you begin to unpack that, it also really, some of the huger disparities are all present in terms of racial diversity. And so I just kind of, again, kept circling back to the same issues on my studies and then in my internships as well. And then when I went on to graduate, I was connected with College for Social Innovation, which runs a Semester in the City program that's really all about increasing access to transformative experiential learning opportunities. And and when I was an undergrad, I was a non-traditional student. I was a self-funded college student, and I didn't have the opportunity to do anything besides go to class and then go to my job that I was also doing full-time. I wasn't really able to partake in some of these really cool opportunities that are available. But I began to see through my graduate experience, both with my internship as well as other work with the Center for Social Innovation and Enterprise. I was a program manager or program assistant for them as well. So I really got to see like how being able to like get your hands in the work that you want to do before you graduate is so important to being able to like move forward and get ready to step into that next career. So when I interviewed, I remember having the conversation. I think my first interview was an informal interview with the CEO, Eric Schwartz, and we just spent 40 minutes of it just talking about the opportunity gap. And I was like, all right, like this aligns with everything I care about. And so even though it wasn't the path I saw myself taking from my policy degree, it felt like a great fit. So I started as a manager of operations, but immediately started recruiting at UMass Dartmouth, which is one of our partner schools, and really kind of found my passion in the organization, like developing systems to really help us analyze our work, not just in our program, but like in our recruitment, and making sure that we're instilling fair recruitment practices and that we're asking the right questions to make sure that we're supporting students from the entire life cycle of the recruitment process. So from when they very first hear about us to when they graduate our program and work as alumni. And our, one of our main missions is to build the talent pipeline, build a diverse talent pipeline for the social sector through these experiential learning opportunities. And taking kind of that approach and over recruiting underrepresented college students was always something that the organization cared about. But I definitely tried to sort of take my knowledge and take everything I didn't know and really try to help us as an organization dig deeper into what that actually means. So in some cases, that means just aggregating the data. We can look at, students of color as a whole, or we can break down and see if like Black and Indigenous students of color have the same results as students of color as a whole, and other activities like that. And I was promoted pretty quickly to Director of Partnership Strategy and Student Recruitment, where I've been able to really kind of keep pushing on those issues and really making sure that, again, from everything our student experiences with us and our organization, but as well for what the colleges that we partner with and the host organizations we place them at, and then when they move into the alumni status, how we partner and engage with the organizations they end up working at. Just trying to take a social justice lens to all of that work has been one of my big passions throughout my time here. And I've been, since COVID, I've had a couple of opportunities to even more deeply engage. We just started a cross-functional diversity, equity, and inclusion work group, which I'm a part of, which I have imposter syndrome for being in all of the time. But like everyone else has said, it is that kind of like, if you're too afraid to make a mistake, then you're not going to take the steps that you need to do. So I've been living that a lot the last couple of months, and it's been really transformative. And I'm just excited to see, as we move into what is going to be a very virtual world in terms of both recruiting for and delivering our program, how can we continue to make sure that we are truly accessible to the widest swath of the students? And I feel like I talked too long, so thank you for that opportunity, and I look forward to chatting more later.
Thanks so much, Lena. So appreciate how authentic of a peek into your world you gave us. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. All right, and last but not least, our last panelist is Deve Levine, who many of you may know, I imagine. He's Assistant Dean of the Graduate School at University of New Hampshire. So Deve, tell us what's going on in your world and introduce yourself to us a little bit more.
Was I muted the whole time?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
There you go. We hear you now.
After 50,000 Zoom conversations, I would have gotten that out of my system, but we're learning. So anyways, thanks so much, everyone. This has been a fantastic panel, and I love hearing everyone's perspectives, and I'm glad to share mine as well. So thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm the Assistant Dean for Student Affairs at the Graduate School here at the University of New Hampshire. I've been here for my 18th year now, working for the Graduate School. I've been a dean now. It's my 5th year being a dean. And so my role at the graduate school is to work with students across all of our programs at both master's and doctoral level, and all of the faculty that serve those programs as well. So I get a really great opportunity to have a pretty decent sized microphone to help with issues of DEI because of my scope, and also the fact that DEI has been written into my job position specifically. So I get to dedicate a certain amount of my time, which I would anyways, but it's nice to actually have that be part of my official duties as well. And I'm also, what brings me here with you today, I also have the pleasure of being a fellow with the Sustainability Institute. So I work closely with Megan and Faina and the rest of the crew on the Fellows Program. And also for those of you who are familiar with the New England Municipal Sustainability Network, I help to run that program as well from the administrative standpoint. So we've been working together to really fold in DEI perspectives and work as we go forward. So, so as far as my background in DEI, I was thinking about what my story is and how I got into this work and what drove me to it. I would trace it back to, for many of you, I'm sure it's the same, my childhood. I was thinking about, all right, what in my childhood was, was so strong in bringing me to this work. I was thinking about I was very lucky that my family has always engaged me in these conversations, started from a young age, and has done some work in the community that I always look back at. One thing that always strikes me in my mind was my mom used to dress up as Mrs. Claus, and she dressed me up as a reindeer, and we would collect all the old toys from our school every year. This is probably first through like maybe fourth grade, and we'd go into different underserved communities, and we would give out toys. And that to me is just, it opened up all kinds of, brain thoughts and networking, and I mean, just the whole kind of just, scope of things in showing me different things I need to think about. And that kind of thing set me on the path to wanting to do this work. So I got to the graduate school, like I said, a long time ago, and right from the get-go, I was fortunate that my job folded in DEI work. So I've been doing that stuff in part ever since. So just to fold my work into the SDG goals that we're kind of using as a framework for today, two of the sub-goals are the ones that I probably connect to the most in my work. One being empowering, promoting social, economic, and political inclusion for all, and the second being ensuring equal opportunity. And so my work at the graduate school on both of those comes in 3 or 4 kind of main frameworks. One is certainly the ensuring equal opportunity. I work a lot on underrepresentation within graduate programs, and for example, about 10% or so of doctoral degrees that are awarded every year are to underrepresented U.S. minority students, but that compares to about 40% of the entire population being from those demographic groups. So right there, we've got this really big gap in terms of how much of the minority groupings are represented in at least one phase, or in one sense, within higher education, and because those are your future faculty and deans and so forth. So I spend a good amount of time thinking about that. The way I have been trained, and the way I think that is a really pragmatic way in dealing with underrepresentation, is that you need to be out there recruiting. But I was taught really well by my former dean to really think about recruitment and retention as 2 sides of the same coin. So I really come at it, and I've been doing this even more so the last couple of years, which has served me really well, not me, but served the purpose really well, of looking at it really from that retention standpoint. And so what I've been really focusing the good bulk of my work on at the graduate school on that end of it is on that retention side. So that in turn means looking at community building for our students that we already have. I can't in good faith go out and recruit if I don't think that we have the proper setup for students to come in and have a proper experience that's going to do the best we can to give them the right resources and mentoring experience at the graduate school at UNH that they should. So within that, I've done a couple things recently that I thought would be just interesting to share. I'd love to hear feedback too. One is I started this thing called, we call it the Advisory Board of Underrepresented Graduate Students. We call it ABUGS for short. We have a little logo of bugs, very friendly bugs that we use. And what that is it's a grouping of graduate students who I know quite well from my work throughout the years, who I've kind of handpicked to serve as my advisory board. And so what we do is we meet monthly to basically just talk, give them a sense of community, get those students to connect, but also to instill a sense of trust within me so that they can tell me what I need to know. Because I haven't been a student for a while, and it would not be, I can't imagine doing this work without having a strong voice from the students that's being honest and truthful about the things that I need to know that I can then be able to put my resources and my time towards doing. The big piece of that is, and I got some real good advice from a friend of mine who's been doing this work even longer than me, was that, it's one thing to have these meetings at the student center or online or whatever. What this person did was over about a 20-year period, she ran a similar type of group of students that grew from, the dozen that I have now. She ended up having around 30 or 40 students per year that would go over to her house once a month for dinner. And she actually got to the point where there wasn't even an agenda. It was just getting these students together with her. So that was really community building. And she said that if she could do one thing again in her social justice work, that would be the one, because it just gave her so many insights and ability to truly get, so much more depth to know these students, and also that they could then, come to her with all kinds of requests, suggestions, all sorts of things, and also then again allow her to use her resources accordingly. So I've been doing the same thing. That's worked out really well. Another thing that I have the pleasure of working on is I'm also the director of this consortium of about 15 universities across the Northeast corridor, including all 6 state flagship universities in New England, so UMass, UVM, UNH, etc. And this group of universities works together to find ways to increase the retention and recruitment of underrepresented minorities in graduate programs. And so that was given to me about a year ago as the director. So I've got this really, it's an incredible opportunity to be able to now have not just my role at UNH, which is a leadership position, but also now it spans across these 15 schools. So just by, scale, there's all kinds of things that we can do. One thing we're going to start working on is that UNH is certainly a very homogenous university, and we recognize that it's hard to create community in a number of aspects when it's that homogenous at the moment. And so one thing that we're thinking about doing is finding ways to use our scale across the 15 universities to start to create more networking and professional opportunities for our minority students within those schools. Another thing we're going to start doing is running these different bias training workshops for faculty, postdocs, and other folks that are teaching students in terms of bias training, ways that they can run their classroom better, ways that they can participate better in different DI efforts. And so again, that can span across those 15 schools. So real exciting on that. I'm also working again, so this has given me a lot of grounding to think about ways that we can fold these efforts into my work at the Sustainability Institute. And we've been doing some things, and you'll hear some more from us about that soon. But we are putting together a alumni group of the Sustainability Institute Fellows, and underpinning a lot of that group's efforts is going to be DEI efforts. So we'll be in touch with that soon. So I want to share a couple things that I learned, that I want to share with you that I think would be important for those who are thinking about engaging in this work. One is at UNH, what I'm seeing, especially in the wake of the George Floyd protests and the other things, a lot of people at UNH that really want to do something. But what I'm picking up on is that the majority of those people don't even know where to start and don't know who to turn to look for direction. So I'd encourage any of you that are looking to be, emerging leaders, take that mantle. I think everyone's looking for people to step up, and this is the opportunity to do it. With that, I'd say one thing that I've benefited a lot is really making sure that you don't do this work alone. Find your allies, find people you can lean on. I've got my core groups around campus that I will, take out for coffee and a beer, and just a lot of times you just need to have people around you that you can just bounce ideas off of. And also then once you figure out what you want to do, have a concerted and collective effort. Last thing I found really helpful is to be able to write this stuff down and document it. So I know time's running short, so I'll stop talking and I'll hand it back over.
Thank you very much, Deve. I gotta call out the theme of community across all of our panelists, whether they're serving the community, working alongside and partnering with the community, or creating community among the groups that they work with. I think those are such critical things to do in this space and in this work. So I'm gonna take some questions, because I saw that we have some questions and trying to keep my eye on the chat. I think Antonio was the first person to say they had a question. Antonio, I'm gonna kick it to you, although I can't see you in a box.
Yeah, thank you. So hi, my name is Antonio Serna. I interned this past summer for the Community Development Finance Authority, working with data to identify underserved communities for outreach. I'm currently a social work major and am considering going into the Masters of Public Policy program at UNH to affect systematic social change through policy analysis and development. So my question is kind of geared towards Alona and Aaron, but what are some barriers that you've seen that prevent you from affecting real social change through your advocacy work? Whether that be systemic or interpersonal or...
You
Are
guys
you
are being
going,
very
Ilona?
you're being very polite. It's the Zoom politeness.
I guess I'll just say a couple things that come to mind. And I do think that, principles of social work are really important in how you think about systems change and how you might think about structural change. So I think that would be a great background. I guess one thing that I've seen, I've worked in some of my work with, governments, and there's a lot of, there can be, challenges and facilitators of that. There's a lot of excitement and opportunity to advance change through that work and through institutions that have that much power and influence. But I think there can also be challenges a lot of the time with different layers of decision making. That's a common thing that a lot of people say a lot of the time. So that can be difficult just because you have to almost convince so many levels of stakeholders of ideas, and there can be systems in place that might make it challenging to go forward really quickly with some ideas, but at the same time, there's a lot of power and influence there. So I guess that would be one thing that comes to mind in trying to quickly move forward aspects of this work.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all that. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I've seen, anywhere from nationwide to like my interpersonal relationships is really building consensus on like what the problem is. I think it's really hard to find a solution to advocate for structural or systemic changes if there's not a like common understanding of what the current state is. And like I said, obviously we see examples of that all over the world nationwide or, across the world. But even in conversations about, power and privilege with other folks in my direct, personal or professional circles, sometimes it's just, it can be challenging to move forward if you don't have consensus on where you're starting from. And so I think that's probably something that I'm personally at least working on a lot, is really, where do you listen? Where do you use data? Where do you finding the right combination of things to help build your case in order to be able to advocate for the things that you need to advocate for?
Thank you both. I appreciate your responses.
Thank you. Jake, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Jake. I'm a fellow with a nonprofit in Vermont called Sola Vida, and I've been looking a lot at how Vermont is preparing itself for climate change, both in resilience and mitigation standpoint. And I've really been interested in this topic. I'm really glad you're all able to join us today for this webinar. And I think particular for me, I've been really interested in corporate sustainability. I'm broadly interested in sustainability, but I've grown more interested in seeing how the different companies are changing, in society and thinking about sustainability as some of the bigger movers. And so what I'm wondering is, when we think about like social justice, what are the sort of solutions that, and this can go for any of you, that you're hoping like the really progressive companies will take into their own hands and actually enact in their operations? Because it seems like these days, the most of what I'm seeing is just that companies are putting out statements or some weak commitments to new trainings and things like that. And it doesn't seem like there's really this strong solution or strategy I'm seeing from any companies like there is with environmental problems and sustainability. So I was just wondering if any of you could speak on that.
Sure, I can share my thoughts, even though I don't have any expertise in corporate sustainability or experience. But from my perspective, I would say I would love to see these companies really get behind these statements, and that means looking at their board, looking at their leadership, looking at their hiring practices, and then also their culture as an institution, right? And I think it was Deve who was talking about recruitment and retention, right? Those are two sides of the same coin. And how do we make the workplace, and as someone who works in city government, right, it's also an organization of about 4,000 employees. How do we shift our culture to support all different, to be a multicultural organization, to support different cultures in the workplace, to, I think one lens will be how to make the workplace more suitable for people who have families, people who are parents, or have, whatever the different roles and responsibilities outside of the workplace, and anything that companies can do to make their culture more conducive to people bringing their whole selves to work, and honoring the humanity of people in the workplace, and not thinking of people as, machines, essentially.
Any other thoughts on that great question from Jake? I also got to agree with everything Leah said. Some important points. It's important to get to the actual and the tangible, and not just the, the stated, going from that performative to the more transformational and the actual. Great question. I think it's Britta had a question for us next. Britta, I think you're on mute. We can't hear you. Oh, microphone isn't working. She'll type her question. Okay, so we'll give Britta a second. In the meantime, is there someone else with another question? There was no one else in the chat list. Any other questions for any of our panelists? All right, Rachel, you have a quick question. Rachel.
Hi there. Thanks so much for your time today. So I'm an intern, actually. I worked with a nonprofit consulting firm this summer. And so one thing I'm kind of thinking about and wrestling with is, I think it's all of our responsibility to leverage what privilege and power we have in our own workplaces to demand better from the places we work for. So I was kind of wondering, do you have any sort of advice for how to push your employers and the people who do have more power above you, particularly when, we're trying to push the bounds of sort of what's acceptable, but also truly demand radical change? And that can be for anyone. Thanks.
Great question, Rachel. Any reactions to that? It looks like some of the panelists are thinking.
Well, I was going to try to.
You want to mute again, Leah. You muted yourself, I think, accidentally.
Oops, sorry. I think, again, Dove hit the nail on the head about building community, right? So, I think that can mean building community inside your organization. So it's not just, you going up against your boss or whoever the other folks in charge are. But also, one thing that we talk a lot about in my work with working in government is an inside and an outside strategy, right? So we have our internal strategy of how to shift changes in the organization, but we're doing it in relationship with an outside strategy that is pushing for change from the outside. And so oftentimes we can, being in community in that way too is really helpful. So it's not just, the crazy Office of Sustainability pushing for this work, but it's really also coming from community who has a different situational sort of perspective and power to the organization.
That's a good one. Anything else?
I would echo what Leah said. It's a really important point. I would probably come at it because I can appreciate, there's such a wide array of, levels of, the vibe of support you're feeling. At UNH, I'm again pretty fortunate that at least on record and on paper I believe it's true. I don't have to fight the fight about getting things to be at least acknowledged that they're important. How we get that work into practice is another the next step. But I do have a lot of friends that are I've got one friend who's a teacher and he's trying to do a whole bunch of different things to his curriculum. This is for 8th graders on, racial justice and I was talking to him last week, and he doesn't have any really good understanding of whether his principal would back him on when the parents who he's like, I'm sure not your parent is going to be pleased with what he's going to be doing, 1619 project, whatever it is. Not if you're familiar, that's the New York Times thing that has come up recently with the Honorable Sandra Cotton from Arkansas. Different story. But he's saying like he doesn't really know. And so I was just saying, my advice to him, which I guess I relate to you, is start with what does the school have on paper in terms of a mission statement, declaration of racial justice, that sort of thing. If that's not there, I guess that's a starting point, right? You can think about how you get maybe a committee up and running. That's all just it's words, but it does provide the platform. And then from that point, that's when you can start to hold upper administration accountable for, look, you said you do this, and they got to find ways to actually, do some tests and make sure that they're actually sticking to it. That's the hard work, but beyond valuable.
Thanks, Deve. All right, Britta's question, I think this might have to be our last question, is the cost of higher education and student loan debt often limits opportunities for minority students. For example, I am a political science student, and many policy internship and jobs do not pay or pay very little, essentially only making them available to students without debt or other resources. This prevents the voice of these groups from ever being heard. What do you all see as possible solutions to this problem? Great question.
I can jump in briefly, kind of because I feel that pain. I remember when I was getting my MPP, they're like, oh, you can take, this unpaid internship in Washington, D.C. And I was like, no, I definitely cannot work for free. Thank you. And I think that's a common problem and is reflected in the diversity or lack thereof of our political leaders, right? So I definitely agree that it is an issue. I think solutions are, I don't have all of the answers for that. I wish that I did. I do think that, my organization, like College for Social Innovation, the Semester in the City program, we take steps in that direction where at least our internship programs are fully credited. So you're getting, you're paying what you would be to be in school and at least getting credit for it. But there's still some problems with the fact that they're not paid internships, right? So like there's other ways that, we support you in a lot of ways, but it's still not hitting all the marks for all the students. So I think that, just pushing for experiential learning opportunities like these to be embedded in the school's offerings and the school's curriculum versus having to seek them outside is a good first step, and something that I know UNH is doing, with the social innovation internship and working with College for Social Innovation and all these other programs. Like, it's giving more of an opportunity to get that experience before you graduate and before you're fully kind of on your own. So it's a step, but there's definitely a lot more work to be done.
Thanks, Elena. That's great advice and great answer. All right, I think that's all we have time for. I'm going to thank all of you. Lots of gratitude to our panelists. Thank you for your time and your energy, your great answers, but also to all of you for your work, your participation. Good luck. And I'm going to kick it back to Megan and Faina. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Maisha, Leah, Erin, Ilana, and Deve for sharing your time with us today and your experiences with us today. And also just want to thank the fellows and the interns for asking us to do this and asking us to keep talking about these issues all summer, and hopefully to continue these conversations with all of you even after the summer is over. So thanks everyone for spending the afternoon with us today. Please connect with each other on LinkedIn so we can keep having these conversations. And with that, this concludes our last of the alumni panel webinar series for the summer, but hopefully there will be more in the future. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, Megan.
Take care.
Thanks, Maisha.
Thank you.